Welcome back. This is episode 136. In this week's episode, I'm going to address a listener question from Lori, and she is wondering if ibonds are still a good deal despite their lower interest rate. And as a reminder, if you have a listener question, please go to retirewithryan.com and click on Ask a Question to submit your listener question. And also my retirement readiness workshops, where I help people put together a plan for retirement, are beginning in March. These are in-person classes that are taking place locally where I am in Connecticut. And if you want to put together your own plan for retirement, consider attending or refer a friend or family member. You can find out more by also going to retirewithryan.com. You can find out the dates and the locations, and stay tuned because in the next couple of weeks, I will be announcing that I've recorded an online version of this class, which will be available for you to purchase. So, Lori, this is a great question, but before I address your question, I think we should cover some of the basics for ibonds because not everyone is familiar with ibonds. And I covered them back in episode 84, titled Increase Your Cash Return with ibonds. So if you listen to that episode, great. If you haven't listened to it or it's been a while, consider going back to it. So first of all, what is an ibond? And an ibond is a U.S. government savings bonds. And U.S. government bonds are often considered one of the safest investments that you can buy. The reason being the stability of the U.S. Democratic system and our payment history. The U.S. has never defaulted on any of its payments. That means we've always paid our interest on time and we've always paid back our principal on time. We've come close to that. Maybe we'll be coming close to that again because Congress has to authorize increases to the debt limit every so often, and that will be a battle maybe that's fought this summer. Hopefully it won't get like it got in 2015, I believe, where there was a potential government shutdown, but we'll have to wait and see. So secondly, how does an I bond work? Where the I part of the bond stands for inflation, and the interest that you receive from the bond has two components. One part is a fixed rate, and that rate is determined when you buy the bond. Currently, that rate is 0.40%, so less than 1%. And I should mention, too, that fixed rate has been 0% for many years. And then the second part of the bond, the I bond part, the inflation, is tied to a measurement of inflation, specifically the Consumer Price Index Urban. And so twice a year, there's an interest rate that's determined on the I bond, and it's based off the change over the Consumer Price Index Urban over the prior 6 months. So that rate is currently 3.24%. So every May 1st and November 1st, the rate is determined. The inflation rate is determined as measured by the change in the Consumer Price Index. And previously to this point, 4% fixed rate, the fixed rate was 0. So you probably heard of ibonds. They're really the hottest investment of 2022 because of the high inflation that we were having, maybe still having, but having as measured by the Consumer Price Index. So that the previous rate was 4.81%. And then the rate before that was also fairly high. So the fact is that if you were to add these two bonds together, then these two interest rates together, then that would be determine what you will get for your interest rate. So I should point out that all these past interest rates are on the Treasury Direct website, and you can look them up by going to treasurydirect.gov and then clicking on ibonds. And you'll see that these interest rates, the adjustable interest rate component of the I bond, has been 1% basically for a long time until May of 2021. And that's where we started to see inflation kick up. And as recently as I mentioned before, this current rate's 3.24%. The rate before was 4.81. And I'm forgetting the exact rate before that, but it was 3 something. So that if you had bought one of these I bonds before November 1st of 2022, that's why they were such a hot investment, before the next interest rate was announced, you would have earned 4.81% because you purchased it before the next rate was announced, which was announced at 3.24%. So you add those together, and you would receive 8% interest for 1 year, 8.05%. So that's why they were such an attractive investment. And then, as I mentioned before, that interest rate is determined, the change to the inflation rate twice a year, so that the rate adjusts twice a year, so you'll know after that adjustment what your interest rate component will be for the next 6 months. So if you bought this bond before May 1st, bought an I-bond before May 1st, you'd know your rate would be 3.24%. And then after that, you're not really sure what your interest rate will be because we won't know what that rate will be until it's announced. Some other things that you should know is that you don't pay interest on the bonds while they are deferred. So that is a nice feature. The interest that you receive just gets added to the value of the bond. And they have a 30-year duration. And many times you can get a higher interest rate on these bonds than you could maybe get in a checking or savings account. And you don't need to do anything while they're earning interest. The interest just keeps getting reinvested. And if you use them for education, there is no federal tax on the interest that you will pay when you redeem them. So what are the restrictions? Well, one of the major restrictions is that you can only purchase $10,000 per person per year per Social Security number or tax ID number. And the lowest denomination you can purchase is for $25. So that $10,000 per year is a sticking point that, let's say you had $200,000 that you recently inherited, or you sold your house and you had this money and you wanted to invest it. Well, you're limited to $10,000 per Social Security number per person per year. So if you're married, you and your spouse could each put in $20,000. If you had another tax ID number for a business like a corporation or an LLC, you could also open up an account in the name of that business or corporation. And I've heard people going as far as just opening LLCs to have these additional tax ID numbers, and you could go about opening multiple accounts with treasurydirect.gov if you had these additional tax ID or Social Security numbers. Now, where I am in Connecticut, I can't remember the exact cost, but it's about $100 a year to have an LLC, so that could really start to add up. It might not be worth this extra interest you could potentially get, but I've read about people doing that in other states that have lesser costs. The only other way to get money into them is that you're able to put up to $5,000 of your tax return into ibonds, so that if you had a large tax return, on your tax return you can denote, do you want to have that money invested in ibonds? And that's another way you can get up above the $10,000 limit, and you could put up to $5,000 per federal tax return. So if you're married, that's combined into the bonds. You also can't sell them for 1 year after you initially purchase them. So they're locked up for 1 year. You can't get your money out for 1 year. And then if you sell them before 5 years, since you've owned them for 5 years, you have to give up 3 months of interest. After 5 years, you can redeem them without any penalty. And they do keep paying interest for up to 30 years. So how do you buy them? Well, this is could be a restriction, you might say. You have to open up an account by going to www.treasurydirect.gov. And you'll open your account there. It's a little bit of, it's not the easiest process, but probably take you about 10 minutes if you have all your banking and information. And then you'll have that login information, and you'll then link your checking account. And once that's linked, then you're able to transfer money into your account. And then when you do that transfer, you can also designate what you want to purchase. You can purchase other things besides ibonds, but you could make that ibond purchase. So I can tell you for myself, I opened up an account for myself. I opened up an account for my wife also in my LLC, and it was somewhat of an arduous process to open up the account for each person, because each tax ID has their own login. I haven't found a way that you can link these together. Like you log in one place and you see all the accounts. Each one has its own user ID and password, and there's two-factor authentication. So you have to get, that means like you get a code from the treasurydirect.gov website once you log in, so you have to enter that in. So it is a little challenging. So Lori, back to your question. So are these still a good idea? So we know that if you were to buy the I-bond before May 1st of 2023, you will earn 3.24% plus the fixed rate of 0.40, so 3.64%. But what we don't know is what the next rate will be. And as I said before, it says right on the Treasury website that it's a measure of the change in the Consumer Price Index urban from October to March. That's how the rate is determined for May. And then for the November rate, they use the change in the Consumer Price Index urban from April to September. So I looked up the Consumer Price Index urban numbers that we have available today, and I was able to find the number for October, which was 298, rounding off. And we don't have the full number yet. We don't have the number through the end of March. That number won't be out probably until like the middle of April. But we do know that at the end of December, the rate was 292. That means there's been a decrease. And we've been hearing about this or reading about it, that inflation's going down. Depends on who you listen to, what you believe, right? But according to the Consumer Price Index urban, it's actually gone down. So if that trend continues, if we don't see a spike in inflation in the next couple months in the February number and the March number, then it's possible that the inflation interest component of these bonds might be zero or near zero. So that means that for the following 6 months, you'll only earn 0.40%. So worst case would be that you buy one of these bonds and you earn 3.64% for 1 year, because you don't get any additional interest on the bond for the following 6 months. And that would be the worst case. Now, it could get worse from there, because if you leave your money in this bond, and let's say we do have really no more significant inflation for the remaining 4 years, you might not really get a whole lot of interest because this is a 5-year bond. Now, I mentioned before you could get out of it and you just give up 3 months of interest. So if you own this bond, let's say for 1 year and 3 months, and you found that inflation's leveled off, you're really not earning the rate of return that you hoped, then you could get out of the bond and you really still would have probably earned about 3.64%. So when we look at alternatives to that, as you probably know, I've talked about it before, interest rates have been going up, which is a good thing if you're a saver, because that means you're getting higher rate of interest on money with money market, CDs, short-term bonds. So one of those bonds is a 1-year savings bond, is an alternative to the I-bond. And right now, I'm recording this on February 8th, 2023. The current rate on a 1-year U.S. Treasury is 4.88%. So you know that if you buy that Treasury and you hold it for 1 year, you'll get 4.88% interest. That interest is taxable at a federal level, but it's not subject to state income tax. So if you live in a state like where I live in, where state income tax in Connecticut, you won't pay state income tax. So this might be a better deal for you, Lori, than buying a I-bond, because we know what we're going to get in the 1-year Treasury. It's possible that inflation could really spike up in the next couple months as measured by the Consumer Price Index urban, and maybe you do get another good interest rate for the following 6 months on the I-bond, but that's the trade-off. The other advantage is that you're not limited to $10,000 per Social Security number or tax ID number, and there's a couple ways that you can buy these treasuries. You also could open up an account with treasurydirect.gov, but it might be a little bit easier to use a discount broker. If you already have an account with a discount broker like Charles Schwab or Fidelity, you can purchase them there, and usually these firms aren't charging you a commission to buy the treasuries. You also could use a non-discount broker. You might pay a commission. You'd have to check on that. But definitely a great question, Lori. And if you do have any other listener questions, please submit those by going to retirewithryan.com. And if you are interested in attending my retirement readiness workshop, you can also check out information about that there. Everyone have a great week. I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. Take care.